Machine gun fire has already killed 9 of his men. Corporal Alvin York is lying in wet leaves on a wooded hillside in the Argonne Forest, France, on the morning of October 8th, 1918. And every officer who outranked him 20 minutes ago is now dead or bleeding out beside him. Above him, on the crest of the hill, German machine gunners are working through the last of his patrol with the calm efficiency of men who have done this many times before. York has a rifle, a pistol, and absolutely no reinforcements coming. What he does next will end with 132 German soldiers walking back to the American lines with their hands raised, escorted by a farmer from Tennessee who, less than a year earlier, had begged his own government not to make him fight at all. To understand how a man ends up alone on that hillside, deciding an enemy company's fate, you have to understand who Alvin York was before the war touched him. He was born in December of 1887 in a 2-room log cabin near Pall Mall, Tennessee, the third of 11 children in a family that survived on subsistence farming, hunting, and whatever wages his father could bring in as a part-time blacksmith. There was little luxury in that childhood and less formal schooling. What York learned, he learned in the hills around his home, tracking game through the mountains with a rifle that had to earn its keep every single time it was fired, because ammunition cost money the family didn't have to waste. By the time he was a young man, York could put a bullet through a turkey's head at 100 yards without a second thought, a skill built entirely out of necessity that nobody in that Tennessee valley could have guessed would someday save an American company's advance on a French hillside. Sometime around 1915, York underwent a religious conversion that reshaped the rest of his life. He became a committed member of a small, fundamentalist Christian church, one that held pacifism as close to its center as any of its other teachings. And York took that conviction seriously enough that when the United States entered the First World War in 1917 and his draft notice arrived, he didn't simply report for duty. He filed for conscientious objector status, telling his commanders plainly that his faith taught him killing was wrong in any uniform for any cause. The request was denied. York was drafted into the 82nd Infantry Division regardless, and by his own account, spent long nights afterward wrestling with the exact question that would define the rest of his service. How a man who believed killing was a sin could be asked to do it anyway, in the name of a country he loved just as sincerely as he loved his church. He told a chaplain with the same plain honesty that marked everything he said for the rest of his life, that if he was meant to be killed, he was ready. What he never quite resolved going into that war was whether he was ready to do the killing himself. York arrived in France in May of 1918 and was in combat within months, fighting through the Saint-Mihiel Offensive that September, where he was promoted to corporal and given command of his own squad. It was a rehearsal, though nobody knew it yet, for what was coming in the Argonne. On the morning of October 8th, York's battalion was ordered across a valley shaped by pure bad luck, like a funnel aimed directly into a wall of German machine guns positioned on the high ground above. The Germans opened fire from 3 sides at once, and the advance simply stopped, men falling in the open with nowhere to take cover. A patrol of 17 soldiers under the command of a sergeant named Bernier Early was sent to work around the German flank and knock the machine guns out from behind. Using a map printed in French that few of them could properly read, the patrol got lost, drifted deep behind enemy lines by accident, and stumbled directly into a group of German soldiers eating breakfast at a headquarters post. In the chaos of the surprise, the patrol captured more than 80 Germans on the spot. A stunning, almost accidental success that lasted exactly as long as it took a nearby German machine gun crew, positioned on the slope above, to spot the Americans standing exposed among their own prisoners. The machine guns opened fire immediately. 9 Americans went down in the first burst, including Sergeant Early, badly wounded and no longer able to command. Command fell, by simple elimination, to Corporal Alvin York, the reluctant, conscientious objector, now the highest-ranking man, left standing in a firefight against a machine gun nest he had absolutely no reasonable way to survive. He didn't retreat. While the surviving members of his patrol took what cover they could find and kept watch over the German prisoners already in hand. York moved alone, working the hillside the exact way he'd worked a Tennessee ridgeline hunting turkey as a boy, calm, deliberate, picking targets from the back of the enemy line forward so that the Germans closer to him wouldn't immediately realize where the shots were coming from. Every round he fired found a man. The Germans, confused about how many attackers they were actually facing, began shifting fire toward him, and still he kept shooting, working through his rifle ammunition with the same unhurried precision his hunting had trained into his hands years before anyone in that forest had ever heard his name. There was nothing frantic about it. Witnesses who survived that morning described a strange, almost unsettling calm in the way York worked the hillside. No wasted motion, no panic in his breathing, just the same patient rhythm a man might use picking off game birds from a tree line back home, except that every target now wore a German uniform, and every miss meant another burst of machine gun fire aimed back at the handful of Americans still alive on that slope. It was precisely that discipline, more than any single shot, that eventually convinced the German position they were facing far more than one determined corporal. At one point, a group of German soldiers broke from cover and charged directly at his position, bayonets fixed, close enough that a rifle was no longer the right tool for the job. York drew his pistol and shot 6 of them in rapid succession before the charge broke apart entirely. The German officer commanding the position, watching his machine gun crews and his infantry both failing to stop a single American soldier, made the calculation that continuing to fight meant losing every man he had loved for nothing. He surrendered. What happened next is the detail that turns this from a firefight into a piece of American military legend. York and the handful of unwounded men left in his patrol marched their prisoners back toward the American lines, and the column kept growing as they walked, absorbing more German soldiers who chose surrender over continuing to fight a unit that had apparently already broken an entire defensive position by itself. By the time York delivered his prisoners to his brigade headquarters, the count stood at 132 German soldiers, including 4 officers, captured essentially by 7 American privates and 1 corporal who, less than a year earlier, had asked his own government to let him stay home. His brigade commander, General Julian Lindsay, looked at the column of prisoners and reportedly said, "Well, York, I hear you have captured the whole damn German army." York's answer, delivered with the same flat, unbothered honesty that defined him for the rest of his life, was simple. "No, sir, I got only 132. The official tally, sorted out once investigators reviewed the chaos of the engagement, credited York with 20 to 28 German soldiers killed, 35 machine guns silenced, and 132 prisoners captured. A single morning's work that French Marshal Ferdinand Foch would later call the greatest accomplishment achieved by any private soldier in any army of the entire war. York was promoted to sergeant on the spot and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Investigators later upgraded the honor to the Medal of Honor, presented to him in the spring of 1919, alongside decorations from a grateful France and Italy that recognized in their own languages the same impossible morning. York came home to Tennessee, a national celebrity, and handled that fame in a way that surprised almost everyone who expected a war hero to cash in on it. He refused most commercial offers built around his name. The endorsements, the stage tours, the easy money that Hollywood and Madison Avenue were both eager to hand a man who had just become the most famous soldier in America. Instead, he poured his energy and what money he did accept into education back home in Fentress County, eventually founding an agricultural institute meant to give mountain children the schooling he himself had barely received. When Hollywood finally did tell his story, in the 1941 film that carried his own name in the title and starred Gary Cooper in the role, York insisted the production stay honest to what actually happened on that hillside. No embellishment beyond what the record could support, because the truth, as far as he was concerned, had never needed any help sounding remarkable. He died in 1964 in the same corner of Tennessee where he'd been born, having spent more of his life trying to educate children than he ever spent talking about the morning in the Argonne forest that made his name famous. His own account of that morning, in a diary entry historians still quote today, put it plainly. The machine guns were cutting the undergrowth all around him, something awful, and he simply didn't have time to dodge behind cover, so he did the only other thing available. He kept shooting.